Welcome. In the last video, we talked about how us humans instruct computers what to do by using a programming language. We also talked about how C++, a human-readable language that has been designed, gets compiled to machine code in order to be executed. In this video, we're going to be talking about the compiler. We will install the compiler in our computer, which we'll be using to program in the future videos. So let's get started. So imagine that we have some C++ code here. And the C++ code, we will give it to some compiler, which we will represent with a little box. So let's say compiler. And then this compiler will do something with this code, right? It'll compile it, it'll turn it into machine code, and it'll produce some zeros and ones. This compiler that we have here is quite unique, and in fact, we can have multiple compilers that are developed by different programmers. Let's say compiler, we're going to call this one compiler number 2, which will also can receive the exact same C++ code, and it might produce completely different sequence of bits underneath. Now, of course, ultimately, both are going to do the same thing, but how one compiler decides to convert the code versus another one could have small different arrangements, and that would produce a different binary. With that being said, when we decide to program with C++, we have to also choose what kind of compiler we want to use. And the compiler that we decide to use, it's dependent on several things. One is also the operating system. So if you have a compiler that is for Windows and you compile your code, that exact same code, you can't just copy and paste it to a Windows machine or a Linux machine and expect it to run. Additionally, we also have to take into consideration the architecture of the computer. For example, you might have heard of 64-bit systems, and you might have also heard of 32-bit system, and you might have also heard of an ARM system. These different architectures, they are affected by the CPU. They were engineered different in several aspects. Some things might be compatible, but some others may not. For example, you cannot compile a 64-bit C++ code into machine code. You cannot take that machine code and run it on a 32-bit system. That would just not work. We have to consider which compiler we're going to use when we're writing software. And we also have to consider, okay, if I give this software to another person, will they be able to run it? If I made a Windows program, could I give it to someone who has a Mac OS or a Linux? And this is why we have to be aware that depending on what machine is going to be executing your code, we have to use the right compiler so that they are able to run and execute our code. Now, of course, independently of the compiler that we use, ultimately the program that we write will do the exact same thing. It's just that we have to make sure that we take into consideration that all these applications that we write, they run on top of the operating system. And if the operating system is different, we have to take into account those differences in order to make sure that our code works properly. So let's get started. So as we mentioned before, the compiler, all it does is it converts C++ code to machine code. But we also need to first write the C++ code. So we want a piece of software that will allow us to write this code, and it also has the ability to compile the code to machine code, and it also has the ability to run it, and so many other programming tools that we will be discussing slowly as we progress through this video series. Therefore, what we want to use is a thing called Integrated Development Environment, or IDE. The purpose of this software is for us to write code, and it offers all these programming tools that we want. Some IDEs have more tools than others, and we're going to be using Visual Studio, which is a very nice IDE that is developed by Microsoft. If you are using a Mac machine, what I suggest is for you to use Xcode. Xcode is an app that you can get from the App Store, and it is the official app for development in macOS. If you have any questions on how to do this, feel free to leave a comment, and I can squeeze in a video on how to do this on Mac, and also we could also do this for Linux. So I want you to go to your browser, and I want you to type visualstudio.microsoft.com. Once you go here, you have a couple options. If you're on Mac, you could try macOS. You could try Visual Studio for macOS, or try Xcode, whichever one you prefer. we will want to download the one on the left. The one in the middle is a very nice editor. We'll talk about this in another video, but we're going to focus on the left one as it is easier to set up, because the one in the middle, think of it as some kind of notepad that has a lot of programming features and extensions. However, it does not come with a compiler, so we have to install the compiler, put them together. It's not bad, but I want for us who are learning, I want something that integrates everything. So you will hover the download Visual Studio and you will download Community, which is the free version. Once the download pop-up comes up, you will hit save, and then we'll double click it to install. Do note that I already have it installed, so I will not proceed with the entire installation. Yeah, so we hit continue. This is going to download a couple of things. You just wait and let it do its thing. Once it's done, you should see a list of options like this. You would want to select the one that says desktop development with C++. I do other stuff with Visual Studio, so I have other things selected. You only need the desktop development with C++. Once you have that selected, then you will have the option to install at the bottom right. I already have it installed, so it's asking if I want to do modifications. I'm not going to proceed with that. You hit next, hit install, let it run through its process until it is completed. Once it's done installing and you open Visual Studio, you will probably be greeted with a welcome and to enter your account. If you have a Windows account, you can use that. Otherwise, feel free to create an account. They're free. Once that's done, then you'll be shown up with this welcome screen that shows all your projects on the left. We don't have any projects, so everything is empty on the left. And on the right, we have the option to create projects or open already existing project. So let's create a new project by clicking on the last button. And on the top where it says all languages, we want C++ language. And then there are different projects already that comes with existing files and stuff like that. We don't want to do any of that. We're going to start with an empty project. So I want you to select an empty project, hit next, and then I'm going to call this project Learn CPP. Feel free to call it anything you want. Be creative for now. And I'm going to call it Learn CPP. Actually, let me put this on the desktop, create a new folder, call it Learn CPP. I will select the folder and I will just hit next, create. Once the project opens up, you'll see this window, and don't feel overwhelmed. There are a lot of options that we can change. We'll learn some of this as we go through this video series, but for now, you can ignore them. And in the next video, we're going to write our first application. Everyone who's learning to program, they have to do their first Hello World application. So we'll look at that and see how that looks in C++, and then we'll start learning how to program. If you like this video, feel free to leave a like. If you have a question or a concern, leave a comment below. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace out.